23 minutes after 5, and the conversation is around the coronavirus and more especially now its impact on the workforce. And joining you to have this conversation is Tertius, Wessels, who's no stranger also to the Early Breakfast Show, a labor expert at Strata-G Labor Solutions. Tertius, good morning once again. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Abungile, and good morning to the listeners.
Tertius, I mean, if you're an employer right now or an employee, there's some interesting conversations that should be happening. It's either you are making people aware about the coronavirus or people are telling you what they need to feel safe about the coronavirus. But just in general, what measures should employers put in place to avoid panic and to improve health and safety in the workplace?
Abungile, I think to answer the question in respect of to avoid panic, one needs to ensure that people are educated, and there's an obligation in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act for all employers to maintain a working environment that is safe and healthy for employees. Now, this obligation not only requires employers to ensure that they constantly follow health advice and information, but they follow the right advice. We see a lot of information going out on social media platforms, but the employers should follow health advice from the World Health Organization and the Department of Health and its National Institute of Communicable Diseases. There's also a lot of other measures that employers can put in place, which includes to prevent the spread of the infection. This obviously means ensuring proper hygiene of employees, constantly ensuring that they are kept up to date. Because remember, there's a lot about this virus that we don't know. And as the days go by and we learn more about the virus, the information might change, and the precautionary measures that we need to implement in the workplace to ensure that it remains a safe place will change.
Talking about such a virus, then, I imagine it brings in the conversation around sick leave. So how should employers handle sick leave when it comes to this?
All right. So if a medical doctor places an employee in quarantine, as an example, the employee should ordinarily receive a medical certificate, and in such circumstances, the employee will become entitled to sick leave. There are other instances where an employee might be placed under compulsory quarantine. That's not necessarily enforced by the employer. So we saw that specifically with the incident in KZN, where the man was placed in quarantine. The doctor himself was also placed in quarantine. And in circumstances like those, the employee will not necessarily become entitled to sick leave. And employers need to be cognizant of these circumstances, because at the end of the day, it's a very unique situation. And whilst there's nothing in law that would necessarily require the employer to pay the employee for that period of quarantine, I think it's incumbent upon all employers to look at these situations, look at each individual case, and consider the possibility of giving employees special leave for these particular incidents.
So there's not necessarily an obligation to pay the individual if it is an enforced quarantine. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, correct. So because remember, there are only certain types of leave that an employee has, and sick leave, the requirement for paid sick leave, is a valid medical certificate. Now, when somebody's placed under this quarantine, it's a precautionary measure. You also have situations where employees might believe that they have been exposed to the virus, but it hasn't been diagnosed as such. And in those instances, the employer must also make a decision. Am I going to risk this person coming to the workplace, exposing other employees to the virus? Or am I going to say to the employee, rather stay home, get proper medical advice, or self-quarantine, as we call it, for a certain period, and then look at, is the employee able to work from home? Because ultimately, if I'm still able to do my work and I can potentially do it from home, why would the employer then still not remunerate me? But these are all precautionary measures that we need to think of in order to limit the spread of the virus and to limit panic within the workplace.
Because, Tertius, that was my main question here, is that do you as an employer now put measures in place? Do you announce to the company or all the employees that, listen, if you feel that you've got a niggling cough or anything, just don't come to work? Or is it a question of we take it case by case? Abs comes into the office, he's looking bleak, and we say, he may look like, he must go home. Or can I, as an employer, just send out a standard email to say, listen, as soon as you feel like you have a niggling cough, don't come to work. I suppose then, though, that exposes you to the fact that, maybe some employees can fake it.
Yeah, and I think it also opens you up for abuse. There might be others that have not been exposed, but they feel, well, I can get an extra 2 weeks off here from work if I bring to my employer's attention that, I think I've contracted the virus. But I think that would be very irresponsible of employees in general, because that would just contribute to the panic that already exists. But sure, there is an obligation on the employer if they see an employee in the workplace that has symptoms to instruct the employee to go and seek medical advice so that there can be certainty regarding that, and if necessary, give the employee any time off. We've seen, it's been reported now, I think, everywhere that the period for this virus is about a 14-day period that you're effectively sitting with. And if somebody is suspected of having contracted the virus, that's also the quarantine period. This is 14 days. Now, we have to understand that the business still needs to function. Business still needs to continue, and therefore both employees and employees should not misuse this concern of employers, but definitely we cannot deny the fact that if somebody is showing symptoms, that there is an obligation to tell them rather, go home, go seek medical advice, and then report back to us as the employer to say, this is the medical advice that I've received.
Tertius, welcome back. We had to bring you back. So many SMSs coming, and we had to choose one or two that you can take on air. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you, Abangile.
So to you listening at home, we were talking about the impact of the coronavirus in the workforce, and some of the conversations, we chatted about sick leave and what and how the doctor would handle this and how the employee or the employer should be handling this. And then we got one or two of your SMSs where Tertius one says doctors are not obliged to disclose individual illnesses or in most sick notes, or rather most sick notes quote medical conditions. So how does the company handle this?
I think in instances like that, where the medical practitioner doesn't disclose the reason for the illness, it won't take away from the fact that the medical certificate will still book the person off for a certain period of time. So if it is a case of COVID-19 that has been contracted, the medical practitioner will issue a medical certificate for 14 days or 21 days. The mere fact that the medical practitioner is not disclosing the reason for it won't mean that the medical practitioner will be negligent on their part by not ensuring that the necessary measures are taken for this person to get the proper treatment. It's obviously for the employee themselves as well. They need to be cognizant of the fact that if they conceal the reason for their illness, they're not only exposing themselves, their family and colleagues to risk, but it's members of the public. So an employee can still not be irresponsible by simply saying, well, the doctor hasn't disclosed the reason for it. There's an obligation on oneself towards others in this particular situation.
Another SMS says, under Office Occupational Health, is there space between office desks for employees the same rule or differ from company to company?
So I think that question probably alludes to the fact that there's been a lot of reports about people having to keep at least a 1 meter distance from one another. So one would obviously have to assess every workplace. Workplaces are very different from one another, but the rules are the same in as far as ensuring that the workplace is not overcrowded, proper ventilation, given a number of people, the size of the room, all those kind of things. So it will be different from organization to organization, which is also the reason why employers need to ensure that if they have health and safety committees, that those people stay up to date, that they are educated, and that risk assessments are done within the business.
We are talking about the impact of the coronavirus on the workforce. We want to find out, or we were asking you to share your concerns. We're chatting to Tertius Wessels, a labor expert at Strata-G Labor Solutions. Tertius, the next question says, hi, Abs. What about industries such as building and textile that use casual labor on a need basis only?
Your obligation remains the same irrespective of the status of an employee. The person working for me on a casual basis, somebody that's permanently employed, or somebody that's on a fixed-term contract, my obligation are the same towards all employees because everybody has the right to fair labour practice, and my obligation to ensure a safe working environment will never change as the employer.
And then this last one, it says, hi, I'm a teacher in Saudi Arabia. The ministry has closed all schools until further notice. Now, officially, the ministry closure is for both students and teachers. Our school has requested us to come into school today. Would this action open them to a liable suit? Could I sue them from South Africa if anything were to happen to my or fellow teacher?
I wouldn't say you therefore have grounds to sue, but the reality is that because there's so much that we don't know about the virus at this point, there's a lot of people that take extreme measures to ensure that they do what is possible to safeguard others against contracting the virus. We've seen it not only abroad, but also in our own country, where people make a decision, I'm going to close the school for now, let's do an assessment. Some people even make the option to get everybody tested when they come to work. But once again, I think this is something that employers, before they make any radical decisions, and same with employees, rather to contact somebody, get proper legal advice, medical advice, so you make sure that you take the necessary or the necessary steps and not drastic measures.
Tertius, thank you once again for giving us more of your time. Good morning to you.
Join the conversation.